Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take the source material you've shared, articles, research, maybe your own notes, and really get into it.
Yeah, we try to pull out the key insights, the bits that maybe surprise you, and figure out what it all means.
And today, we're focusing on a specific request, looking into the complex reality of informal settlements, often called slums, in Accra, Ghana.
That's right. We've got a really interesting set of sources here that, go beyond the usual postcard view of Accra.
They really zoom in on these communities.
Exactly. Home to thousands, but facing these significant challenges that often don't make the headlines.
So our mission, based on the stuff you sent us, is to unpack a few things. We want to trace the history, how these places started.
Understand the day-to-day living conditions, the challenges people face there.
Yeah, and explore some specific areas the material highlights.
And look at the sort of systemic reasons behind it all.
Right. And then finally, what's being done? What opportunities do the sources see for improvement?
It's clear from the material. Accra is a city of real contrasts. You've got the history, the modern buildings.
But then you also have these large informal settlements woven into the city.
Yeah, and the sources emphasize these aren't just temporary spots. They're established communities, vital ports of the city, really, but grappling with some major issues.
Okay, let's get into it then. The history. The sources suggest this goes back further than you might think. Not just recent decades, but early 20th century. Colonial times.
Yeah, under British rule. That's a key point the sources make. Accra was growing, becoming a trading center.
So people moved there from rural areas looking for work, naturally.
Exactly. But the colonial government, well, they just didn't build enough proper housing. Or they didn't prioritize it anyway. Not nearly enough for everyone coming in.
And the material basically says this led to informal settlements popping up. People just building where they could, near jobs, maybe.
Pretty much. Near ports, industrial areas, and even older neighborhoods like parts of Jamestown or Ushertown mentioned in the sources started getting overcrowded, run down. The infrastructure just couldn't keep up. Then after World War II, urbanization really kicked into high gear, more people, Ghana's economy growing.
But the housing problem just got worse.
It deepened, yeah.
Significantly.
So by independence in '57, places we know today as major informal areas, Nima, Mama Mobi are mentioned, they were already there, housing low-income workers mainly.
That's what the sources indicate. And then later, like in the 1980s, economic problems and those structural adjustment programs.
Those big economic reforms, austerity and all that.
Right. The material suggests those actually made things tougher, limited what the government could do, increased poverty, and kind of cemented the existence of these settlements.
So it's a mix of factors over a long time. Early history, economic shifts, the sheer speed of growth.
Exactly. The sources paint it as a layered problem, deeply rooted in how Accra developed, not just some accident. Okay, let's talk about some of the specific places the sources focus on. Because they make it clear these aren't all the same. Each one seems to have its own distinct issues. Where do we start?
Well, Ulfadama comes up a lot, sometimes called Sodom and Gomorrah in the material, pretty starkly.
Right. Accra's biggest informal settlement.
Yeah, huge population, tens of thousands. But the sources really stress how severe the conditions are. Extreme overcrowding, sanitation is a massive problem, and flooding, frequent bad flooding.
And its location, right by the Coral Lagoon, that seems key to the problems described. The sources mention open dumping. E-waste, too.
Yes, electronic waste. Big contributor to environmental damage, health risks. It's all laid out there in the material.
And right next door, Agbog Blashi. That place is, infamous globally for e-waste, isn't it?
It is. The sources are blunt, calling it one of the most polluted places on Earth.
Wow. And the sources detail this grim picture. People trying to make a living salvaging metals, but breathing toxic fumes from burning plastic casings exposed to heavy metals.
It's described as this really difficult intersection of, economic survival and environmental catastrophe. People needing the work, but the work itself being incredibly hazardous.
Okay, so that's Old Fadama and Agbog Blashi. What else?
The sources also talk about Nima and Mamobi up in the northern part of the city.
Right, mentioned earlier as being established quite a while ago.
Yeah, very dense, lively areas, lots of culture, commerce. But they also struggle with basic infrastructure, clean water access, drainage, waste collection, even though they're vibrant communities.
And then down on the coast, Chorkor, a fishing community.
Traditionally, yes, the material points to high poverty, again, infrastructure issues, but also a specific vulnerability to the environment flooding, coastal erosion threatening their livelihoods from the sea.
But still vital for fishing and culture.
Absolutely. And then there's Jamestown, which we mentioned historically.
Parts of it facing similar issues, even though it's a historic site.
Exactly. The sources describe pockets dealing with overcrowding, sanitation problems, unemployment. It's complex because other parts of Jamestown host big cultural events, like the Shale Wote Festival.
So it really shows, like the sources say, that informal settlement covers a whole spectrum of situations.
Definitely. From massive environmental hotspots like Old Fadama Agbogbloshie to dense but underserved areas like Nima, vulnerable coastal spots like Chorkor, and even historic areas with internal struggles.
Okay, so that brings us to the why.
Yeah.
What do the sources identify as the main drivers, the root causes behind all this?
The sources consistently point to rapid urbanization, just the sheer number of people moving to Accra, mainly from rural areas looking for better opportunities.
And the city just can't keep up in terms of formal housing, infrastructure.
Exactly. It completely outstrips the capacity. So for many, informal areas become the only option they can afford, and often they're located, relatively conveniently near potential jobs, even if those jobs are informal too.
And this ties into the national housing deficit the sources mentioned. That sounds like a huge number.
It is. The material cites figures over like 1.8 million units needed nationally. For Accra, that means a severe shortage of affordable, formal places for low-income people. It just pushes them towards informal housing.
And economic inequality, that plays a big role too, presumably.
Oh, absolutely. High levels of inequality mean a large chunk of the population just can't afford the formal market rates, even for the housing that is available. So demand for any kind of affordable shelter stays high.
And the final piece seems to be weak urban planning.
Right. The sources argue that over decades, planning wasn't adequate, and enforcement of zoning laws was inconsistent. This allowed settlements to grow and expand without the necessary services or infrastructure being put in place alongside them.
Creating the difficult conditions we've been talking about.
Yeah, it's a combination of all those things.
So the daily reality for people living there, as the sources describe it, sounds incredibly tough because of these systemic issues.
Yeah, the material talks about housing that's often precarious, maybe makeshift, easily damaged by rain or floods.
And basic services. Water, sanitation.
Critically limited is how the sources put it. This leads to major health risks. Outbreaks of diseases like cholera are mentioned specifically.
And it creates a kind of trap, doesn't it? The sources mention limited access to good education or formal jobs within these areas, making it hard to break the cycle of poverty.
It's this complex knot, really. Historical factors, ongoing economic pressures, planning gaps, environmental issues, all impacting the daily lives of residents described in the source material.
Okay, so that's the challenge laid bare by the sources.
Right.
What about solutions? What's being done or what potential is there, according to this material?
Well, the sources do talk about government efforts, things like projects to upgrade infrastructure in some areas, attempts to build affordable housing, public health campaigns focusing on sanitation.
But there are hurdles. The material notes challenges with funding, which isn't surprising, but also resistance from residents. That's interesting.
It's a really critical point in the sources. It hints at the difficulties of top-down approaches, maybe interventions that don't quite match what people on the ground need or prioritize.
Or maybe not enough consultation. Lack of buy-in.
Could be. The sources suggest that's where NGOs and community-led initiatives often step in more effectively.
Working directly within the communities.
Exactly. Focusing on things like health education, job training, economic empowerment programs within the settlements themselves, the idea being to empower residents to lead their own development.
And this whole issue connects to bigger global goals, right? Like the UN's Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah, SDG 11 is mentioned, making cities inclusive, safe, resilient, sustainable. The sources argue that integrating residents of informal settlements into city planning is vital for achieving that. You can't just ignore these huge populations.
So looking forward, what are the key opportunities the sources identify?
Inclusive urban planning is a big one. Shifting the mindset, Instead of seeing these areas just as problems to be cleared, integrating them. Investing in infrastructure and services within them.
Working with the existing communities, not against them.
Right. Another opportunity highlighted is public-private partnerships. bringing together government, businesses, NGOs to pool resources for things like affordable housing, better sanitation, or creating formal job opportunities.
Makes sense. Combining strengths.
And finally, it comes back to empowering residents. Better education, skills training, access to microfinance. The sources suggest these can help lift communities from within, letting people contribute more to the economy and maybe break that poverty cycle.
Okay, so this deep dive, using the sources you provided, has really taken us through a lot. From the colonial roots
Through the specific, intense challenges in places like Old Fadama or Agbogblashi,
to the underlying causes of rapid growth, housing shortages, planning issues.
and finally looking at the efforts being made and the potential pathways forward discussed in the material.
It really underscores how understanding these communities is, well, it's essential for grasping urban development challenges in a city growing as fast as Accra.
Definitely. As the sources show, these communities, despite all the difficulties, are integral to the city, not separate from it.
So, thinking about all this, what does it mean for you listening? Why is this deep dive relevant? Well, hopefully this gives you a much richer, source-based understanding of what global urbanization actually looks like on the ground.
Yeah, the pressures cities face, the complex reality for millions in informal settlements worldwide, not just Accra.
It takes you beyond simple headlines, hopefully, into the lived experiences and the systemic forces at play, as shown in this specific material we've examined.
And maybe one final thought to leave you with. Drawing from what the sources highlighted, we heard about the challenges with top-down government plans, funding issues, sometimes resistance.
And we also heard about the importance of grassroots, community-led efforts.
Right. So the provocative question is, how can you actually bring those two approaches together effectively? How do you integrate that top-down planning capability with the bottom-up energy and knowledge of the community to create change that's truly sustainable and genuinely inclusive in places like Accra?